Have you ever heard of Bigfoot? A mysterious creature, half man, half myth, said to roam the wildest forests of the world. From giant footprints to eerie sightings, the stories about it have fascinated and intrigued people for decades. In this video, we'll explore 5 real encounters that shaped the Bigfoot legend. From the famous Patterson-Gimlin film to the rocks thrown in Ape Canyon, these stories will take you to the heart of the unknown. Get ready to dive into tales full of suspense and mystery. Does Bigfoot really exist? The answer may be closer than you think, but first, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel for more content like this. It was a quiet autumn afternoon, October 20th, 1967, in the dense forests of Bluff Creek, Northern California. Roger Patterson and Bob Gimlin, 2 men passionate about exploring the unknown, rode on horseback through towering trees and murmuring streams. They were no strangers to this quest. For years they had heard stories of a legendary creature, a hairy giant the locals called Sasquatch. But on that day, mere curiosity would turn into a landmark moment in the history of mystery. Suddenly the horses grew restless, whinnying nervously. Something was different in the air. Patterson looked up and froze. There, just a few yards away, near the creek bank, a massive figure moved. It stood over 7 feet tall, covered in dark fur that glistened under the sunlight filtering through the treetops. It wasn't a bear, nor was it a man. It was something in between. Patterson's heart raced as he grabbed his 16mm camera, a tool he carried precisely for moments like this. He dismounted, nearly stumbling, and began filming, his trembling fingers struggling to capture what his eyes could barely believe. The creature, later nicknamed Patty, walked with steady, deliberate steps. Its gait was strange, almost human, yet with a raw power that seemed impossible to replicate. Its long arms swung at its sides, muscles flexing beneath the thick fur. For nearly a minute, Patterson filmed, the whirring of the camera mixing with the sound of flowing water and the tense silence of the forest. Then, as if aware it was being watched, the figure turned its head, locking eyes with the 2 men before, vanishing into the trees. The silence returned, but the impact of that encounter would never fade. Bob Gimlin, holding the reins of the frightened horses, stood beside Patterson as they tried to process what they had just witnessed. That shaky strip of celluloid would become the most famous and most debated piece of evidence for Bigfoot's existence. When they returned to civilization and shared the footage with the world, what had been a local legend exploded into a global phenomenon. Scientists, mystery hunters, and skeptics scrutinized every frame. Some argued that Patty's movements, fluid and natural, with long, purposeful strides, couldn't have been faked by a man in a costume at the time. Others insisted it was an elaborate hoax. But for Patterson and Gimlin, it was real. Until the end of their lives, they stood by their story, despite criticism and ridicule. Bluff Creek, once just a dot on the map, became a pilgrimage site for Bigfoot enthusiasts. And that film? It remains the holy grail of sightings, a piece of history that defies easy explanation. Was Patty just a trick of light and shadow? Or did 2 men, on that fateful day, capture a glimpse of something science still can't explain? The answer, like the creature itself, remains hidden in the dark forests of Bluff Creek. Picture a damp August morning in 1958, deep in the untamed forests of Humboldt County, California. The sun had barely risen, and the air carried the scent of wet earth and pine. Jerry Crew, a burly and no-nonsense bulldozer operator, arrived at his worksite as he did every day. He was a man of routine, used to the roar of machinery and the solitude of the mountains. But that morning, something stopped him dead in his tracks. There, right beside his bulldozer, were footprints, but not ordinary ones. They were enormous, as if a giant had passed through. Jerry crouched down for a closer look. The impressions measured about 16 inches long, wide and deep, pressed into the fresh mud as if something incredibly heavy had made them. They weren't boot marks or the tracks of any known animal. They had 5 distinct toes, like a human foot, but impossibly large. He ran his hand along the edges, feeling the rough texture of the earth. Whatever made these had been here recently. A chill ran down his spine, but Jerry wasn't the type to back down from a mystery. He needed answers. With the help of his co-workers, Jerry made plaster casts of the prints. As the material dried, he couldn't tear his eyes away from them. The footprints weren't isolated. They formed a trail, a line of massive steps cutting through the mud and disappearing into the dense forest. What, or who, could have feet this big and the strength to leave such deep impressions? Jerry had no answers, but he knew this was too big to keep to himself. He took the casts and his story to the local newspaper, the Humboldt Times. What happened next changed everything. When the paper ran the story, with a photo of Jerry holding the cast beside his own foot for scale, the world took notice. The headline screamed about a Bigfoot, and just like that, the name we all know today was born. Bigfoot. The story spread like wildfire, leaping from California's mountains to every corner of the globe. Scientists came to examine the prints, baffled by their depth and spacing. Some argued no human could have made them without machinery or elaborate tricks. The weight needed to sink that deeply into the mud was beyond normal. Others, of course, laughed it off, calling it a hoax, a prank by bored loggers. But Jerry Crew wasn't laughing. He wasn't a man with a wild imagination or someone chasing fame. To him, those footprints were real, a riddle left behind by something he never saw, but felt was watching. In the days that followed, other workers in the area reported similar tracks, as if Bigfoot itself was lurking nearby, observing. The forest, once just the backdrop of their labor, now seemed alive with secrets. Humboldt County was never the same. Jerry Crew's footprints put Bigfoot on the map, turning a local mystery into a worldwide legend. To this day, the plaster casts are displayed like relics, and the questions remain. What walked through that mud in 1958? Was it a forest giant, or just an illusion? Jerry took his certainty to the grave, but he left behind a legacy that still echoes, the first step in a legend that never stops growing. It was a cold night in 1969 on the winding roads between Paradise and Sterling City, California. Mr. and Mrs. Robert L. Behme drove in silence, the hum of the engine cutting through the darkness as their headlights illuminated the deserted asphalt. The surrounding forest seemed to swallow everything whole, towering trees, dense shadows, and a silence so heavy it pressed against them. They were used to these late-night drives, but something felt different that evening. The wind carried whispers, and the usual chorus of nocturnal animals had gone eerily quiet. Then, without warning, a figure emerged from the darkness and crossed the road right in front of them. Mr. Behme slammed on the brakes, tires screeching against the pavement. Mrs. Behme let out a muffled scream as their eyes locked onto what the headlights now revealed. It was tall, taller than any man they'd ever seen, covered in a mix of short, dark hair streaked with lighter patches, as if touched by moonlight. Its face was pale, almost human, but unsettlingly off. There was no glint in its eyes, no reflective shine like deer or coyotes at night. Its head had a strange, raised crest, a shape neither of them could explain. For a heartbeat, the creature paused, staring right at them, before vanishing into the underbrush with silent, impossible speed. The couple sat frozen, the car idling, hearts pounding. Neither spoke for a long moment, struggling to process what they'd seen. It wasn't a bear. Bears didn't walk upright like that, with such deliberate strides. It wasn't a man. No man had that size or that face. Finally, Mr. Behme broke the silence. "You saw that too, didn't you?" Mrs. Behme only nodded, her eyes still fixed on the spot where the figure had disappeared. They drove home that night, but what they'd encountered on the road followed them like a shadow. Days later, the story took another turn. Emma Paul, a local woman, heard the Behme's account and came forward with her own family's experience. Shortly after the sighting, she said, "Something began prowling around their property in the hills of Megalia. First came the sounds, branches snapping in the woods, heavy footsteps echoing in the night. Then, one evening, she looked out her window and saw a massive silhouette standing near the tree line. It was tall, hairy, exactly as the Behmes had described. The creature didn't attack. It just stood there, watching, as if curious. For weeks, the Pauls felt eyes on them, an unseen presence that kept the family on edge. The Behmes and the Pauls weren't the kind to spin tales. They were ordinary people living quiet lives until something extraordinary crossed their paths. When they shared their stories, some neighbors laughed, others grew uneasy. But one detail was impossible to ignore. The descriptions matched too perfectly. The pale face, the mottled fur, the strange crest on its head. It was as if they'd all seen the same thing. Megalia, already steeped in rumors of strange creatures, had just added another chapter to its lore. What the Behmes met on that road in 1969 was never photographed or filmed, but it burned itself into their memories. Was it Bigfoot? A trick of the light? They never doubted what they'd seen, and Emma Paul's account only solidified their certainty. Something was out there, lurking in the shadows. The night may hide countless secrets, but for this family, one of them took shape, tall, silent, and impossible to forget. It was the summer of 1924, near the towering Mount St. Helens in Washington. A group of miners, led by Fred Beck, worked deep in the mountains where the air smelled of sulfur and pine. These were tough men, hardened by isolation and the dangers of the wilderness. They had built a simple cabin near a ravine called Ape Canyon, a name that, at the time, meant little. But that season, what began as a routine work expedition turned into a night of sheer terror, a story that would echo for generations. It started on a sweltering afternoon. Fred and his crew were prospecting when they spotted something strange. Near a spring, a tall figure covered in dark hair standing motionless among the trees. It looked almost human, but larger, wilder, with broad shoulders and a posture that defied logic. One of the miners, acting on impulse, raised his rifle and fired. The gunshot cracked through the ravine, and the creature staggered, letting out a guttural scream before vanishing into the woods. The men returned to their cabin, uneasy but convinced the encounter was over. They were wrong. When night fell, the forest came alive with something more than wind and wildlife. First came the thud, a heavy impact against the cabin wall. The miners, still awake, exchanged nervous glances. Then another hit, harder, followed by the sound of rolling rocks. Fred cautiously opened the door and saw shadows moving in the darkness. There were several of them, tall, hairy figures like the one they'd seen earlier. Before he could react, a barrage of stones rained down on the cabin, splintering wood and filling the air with dust. The men grabbed their guns, hearts pounding. The creatures, later dubbed Ape Men, didn't relent. For hours, they bombarded the cabin with rocks and logs, howling and snarling in a chorus that turned blood to ice. Fred fired through the window at shadows darting between trees. One miner yelled that a figure had climbed onto the roof, its weight making the beams groan. The attack felt coordinated, as if the creatures sought revenge for the earlier gunshot. The cabin, built to withstand storms, shuddered under their fury. Inside, panic mounted. Walls buckled. The stench of sweat and fear thickened. What were these things? Bears didn't throw rocks. Men didn't have such brute strength. Fred, the most level-headed, fought to stay calm, but even he felt the weight of the unknown. The night stretched endlessly, each minute marked by another crash or growl. Only at dawn did the assault cease. The creatures retreated, leaving behind destruction, scattered stones, cracked walls, and massive footprints in the mud. By morning, the miners fled, abandoning tools and supplies. When they told their story, few believed them. Skeptics called it a tall tale or blamed a lost tribe, but Fred Beck swore to his dying day that it happened. He described the creatures as towering, fur-covered, and impossibly strong, nightmares from the forest's depths. The ravine earned its name, Ape Canyon, as a testament to that night. There are no photos, no physical proof, just the accounts of men who faced the impossible. Was it Bigfoot defending its territory? Or something beyond human understanding? The 1924 incident left more questions than answers, but one thing is certain. For Fred Beck and his crew, the fear was real, and the legend, immortal. It was a summer night in 2008, deep in the forests of Willow Creek, California, a place many call the Bigfoot capital of the world. A group of friends, camping under a sky full of stars, laughed around a crackling fire, swapping ghost stories for fun. But that night, the story they'd live wouldn't need embellishment. Something real was about to cross their path, something that would make them question everything. It started with a sound. At first, it was subtle, a twig snapping in the woods, like a deer or rabbit passing through. But then it came again, louder, closer. The campers fell silent, eyes scanning the darkness beyond the firelight. Then another noise, a low, guttural growl, vibrating through the trees. The bravest among them grabbed a flashlight and aimed it into the forest. The beam trembled in his grip as he searched for the source, and then they saw it. Just meters away, half hidden behind thick pines, stood a massive figure, over 7 feet tall, covered in dark, matted hair that seemed to absorb the light. It wasn't a bear. It stood upright, with long arms hanging at its sides. The campers froze, breath trapped in their lungs. The creature didn't move at first. It just watched, studying them as they studied it. The flashlight caught its face, pale, almost human, but with coarse features and eyes that didn't reflect light. For a heartbeat, time stopped. Then, in a blur, it turned and vanished into the trees. The sound of breaking branches echoed as it retreated, too fast to follow. The campers bolted for their tents, hearts racing, torn between fear and awe. No one slept that night. At dawn, they searched the area and found proof, huge humanoid footprints pressed into the mud near their camp. No photos, no video, just their testimony and those eerie impressions, silent witnesses to an encounter they'd never forget. Willow Creek was already famous for Bigfoot lore, but this sighting dragged the legend into the 21st century. The campers reported their experience to local researchers, and the details matched other accounts. A tall, hairy, eerily curious creature. Some say Bigfoot still roams those woods, an invisible guardian that appears only when it wants to be seen. There was no violence, no chase, just a fleeting moment between humanity and the unknown, lost in the vastness of the night. This case reminds us, the Bigfoot mystery isn't just history. In 2008, those campers felt the weight of something real, something that defies easy answers. Was it him, the real Sasquatch, or a trick of the mind? The truth belongs to those who were there, and maybe to you hearing this story now. Want more? If you enjoyed this dive into the unknown, hit like, share with your fellow mystery lovers, and subscribe for more encounters like this. Who knows what we'll uncover next?